What's up? Welcome back. In this segment, I'm going to talk about Wicca a little bit. I get a few people who ask me about what my thoughts on Wicca are, and then sometimes when they ask me, I could tell that they have. It's almost like they feel like they want me to say something bad about Wicca, and I don't know why. I guess because I'm supposed to. I don't know. I don't really know. When I see some of the anti-Wicca stuff on the internet, I can see if that stuff is coming from a Christian. I understand that because Christianity and Wicca have had an old beef for a long time. Many people don't really realize, Christianity and to some extent Judaism, but more Christianity has been able to repackage itself as the official religion of Europe or of Indo-European culture, right? So, you know, even in America, sometimes when you see now the Christian Muslim stuff and when they talk bad about Muslims, there's hidden elements to it where it's almost like Christian tends to be Anglo-Saxon or WASP, and Muslim tends to be other, right? And so, in a sense, Christianity has kind of, and this, I'm not even bashing Christianity, I'm just keeping it real. They have been able to repackage themselves as the official language of Europe and of Western culture. But what people don't really realize is, and it gets kind of difficult because I would. This is why I'm combining Wicca and Celtic spirituality. It's combining them. They're two different spiritual systems, obviously. And the thing I like about both systems is that they both systems. If you take Wicca, because Wicca on one level you could say, well, it just started in the 50s, right, by Gerald Gardner. But if you take it on another level, when Gerald Gardner and his people started Wicca, they try to resurrect spirituality that was already existing in Europe before the Christian invaders came in, especially in Northern Europe, right? Not really, I'm not gonna say it was in Southern Europe, but in Northern Europe, right? He tried to resurrect customs that was already taking place and practices that was already taking place. And I think for this reason, this is why people sometimes get Wiccan, and Celtic confused, right? Um, Even Judaism confused because the Druids are just a particular branch of Celtic spirituality. Like they're like the elite branch, right? But you can be a Wiccan and not be a witch, and you could be a witch and not a Wiccan. Like, yeah, the two terms have a relation to each other, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're the same, right? And just like Wicca for sure and Celtic spirituality are completely different. How are they completely different? Well, first, usually when you practice in Celtic spirituality, it tends to be focused a lot on blood. So you got to be from that Celtic culture, right? Or from a culture, or you have to have a certain amount of spiritual knowledge that the elders of that culture would respect you to let you in, right? Where Wicca, yeah, Wicca, you get initiated too, and yeah, for the most part, you see Wicca. It seems like it's associated more with Europe, but anyone can really be initiated in Wicca, and that's why you see Wiccans of all nationalities, right? So Wicca to me, I'm not gonna say it's unique, but what makes it special is that to me, they tend to anyone can enter Wicca, and if you have, the right intentions and somebody trusts you, they let you in, right? It doesn't have as much to do with culture it comes from, even though yes, it's formulated based on traditions of Europe pre-Christianity, so it's gonna obviously be more associated with Europe, but it still lets everyone in if you have the right intentions. And so when you look at the structural differences between Wicca and Celtic spirituality, it's obvious. And sometimes people who practice Celtic spirituality, or at least from Celtic cultures, don't like the fact that Wiccans act like Celtic culture is dead. Celtic culture still exists, honestly. And not only does it still exist, Celtic spirituality and Wicca is completely different. Like, for instance, Wiccans usually draw a circle around themselves, like a protective circle, or even a circle just to do their spells. Where in Celtic spirituality, you actually supposed to search out for a sacred space to do your rituals. So Wicca in general could be you can do it as a singular person. In Celtic spirituality, it's very hard to do that because you usually are seeking out a sacred space, and then together with others are doing a ritual, right? So that in itself is completely different. Even Wicca, when it comes to the goddesses and gods, are completely different because in Wicca, the gods and goddesses are still seen as all part of the same female goddess. Where in Celtic spirituality, the gods are definitely individuals, totally different from each other. So just from that angle, there's definitely differences between the two. But one thing I like about them is that they both kind of prove the fact that Europe had systems that existed before Christianity. And the thing I like about Wicca is that I can't find I can't find anything wrong with it. And like, I mean, even if you're into spirituality, it talks about Wicca is built around the elements, right? And that's what it's based on. And one advantage I give Wicca, believe it or not, is that in a lot of other systems, when they deal with elementals or elemental spirits, they tend to fuse it with God forms. So because they tend to fuse it with God forms, um, you kind of like you don't get the pure raw version of the elemental power, right? One thing I like about Wicca is that, and you have different traditions of Wicca, but in some of the traditions I've seen, yes, you can fuse it with different. They still might have a goddess that is associated with an elemental spirit, but in general, they tend to deal with the elemental spirits as they are, right? So let's say if I said, I don't want to say anybody's name, but let's say there was a water goddess and her name is a certain name, right? And I say, oh, this is the water goddess. Then that means usually when I plug into the energy, it really works more for the people of that culture. But if I say fairy, and if I say, earth spirit or wind spirit or fire spirit, even though you could still say salamander and mermaid, it actually transcends culture to some extent. Even though it's still kind of tied in because fairy and mermaid still come from a certain culture, it's still not as bonded as if I just give a god form to that particular elemental spirit. So from that angle, especially if you're coming from the point of view where you're not, you don't really come from an ancestral lineage, right? You don't really have access to that type of teaching. Wiccans have so much books; it's more open, especially if you're in the West. I can't say a person shouldn't do it, like shouldn't join it if they have the right intentions, if you find the right people to teach you. Because why? They still teach you about the four directions. Still teach you about the element. They teach you about the pentagram. They teach you about the importance of ancestors. It's still it's still grounded on in earth, in the earth element, which I think is important for humanity because out of the four elements, earth tends to be the weakest in humans. So, in general, Wicca actually, like if a person tells me, I know I want to be New Age, I want to be Wiccan, I'm gonna say go to Wicca. Even if you tell me I want to do yoga as a by itself, like meaning, if you come to me and are like, I'm gonna do yoga, and at the same time you're interested in Wicca, I would say, well, yoga would teach you mental discipline, but actually, honestly, I would actually say I would go with the Wicca over yoga in a heartbeat. At least what people are calling yoga, because what I mean by that is, and this is not disrespect to yoga, but yoga, I always say spirituality is supposed to teach you about harmonizing with your environment. Always supposed to teach you that. There's two things it's supposed to do. It's supposed to teach you about harmonizing to your environment, and it's supposed to create a mental change where when you do this system for a certain period of time, you're a different person in a good way. Now, if you learn yoga right, there's no comparison. If you learn yoga right, yoga is far superior to Wicca. But if I'm talking about a person in the West just reading yoga books versus a person reading Wicca books, listen, when you read the Wicca books, you're gonna know about herbs. You're gonna know about certain remedies to heal. Yeah, I actually would prefer Wicca. As crazy as that may seem. Now, if you have an authentic yoga teacher, then there's no comparison. But so I think Wicca gets a bad rap. Like for me personally, especially if you're a woman, particularly, it's really good. I think if you're a man, the only thing I would say about it is that it relies heavily on the feminine, and if you're a man not comfortable with your own masculinity, I'm not sure if that's the best fit for a male. But for a woman, there's no question. Like Wicca, for me, I have no problem with. You know, I like it more as a symbol as well because I think sometimes when people look at European spirituality, they just look at Europeans as conquerors. But people don't really understand Europe's a big place, and the segment of European society that we're talking about that conquered the world doesn't really have anything to do with Wicca. Witches. People have to understand there are witch hunts that the Catholic Church did, and thousands of people died. So when we always talk about the Catholic Church and other Christian denominations killing pagans, people like I want to say Wiccans because Wicca itself was formed as a newer system, but the systems that Wicca was supposed to be resurrecting, they lost a lot of people. So they suffered just as much as, and I'm not gonna say just as much because that would be a lie. Indigenous people still suffered more because at least the Wiccans, they probably just gave up the spirituality where indigenous cultures, first of all, more of them died. That's the first thing. Second, I think they had to give up their culture, language, every single possible thing, right? And thirdly, if you say you practice Wicca now versus you say you practice voodoo now, obviously people would just turn their heads in a negative way to voodoo. So you have more pressure not to practice indigenous spirituality versus practicing Wicca. But that's not Wicca's fault per se. That's the system that people are living in, that we live in right now. So for me, I don't have a problem with Wicca because I definitely think when I look at it, when I look at a lot of other spiritual systems right now, especially New Agers, do you know about the four directions? No. Do you know about herbology? Like, I think understanding herbs is extremely important. No, they don't teach that, right? Being able to understand about the importance of the trees, even respecting the feminine. No, they don't. They don't teach any of that. Even in the sense that when you look at it from a certain angle, people always say, "Oh, Wicca is young." Wicca is young if you look at it as, "Oh, it started 50 years ago." But when you understand that there was, and there's dispute because some people say when people say there was a matriarchal culture in Europe, that's a lie. I'm not gonna say it's a lie, but it's hard to prove, especially since there is definitely a segment of the power structure that doesn't want this type of info out, right? So once you start saying that there was a matriarchal culture in Europe before, and then especially in the northern regions, um, before Christianity took over, people ask too many questions, right? So people don't want those type of questions asked. So now a lot of scholars are trying to debunk that Europe is always patriarchal. I mean, even when you talk about the witch hunts, they would say, well, and this is the most ludicrous one. Well, the witch hunts, yeah, thousands of witches died, but it wasn't the Catholic Church. That was individual incidents where people were just killing witches. To me, that doesn't make any sense, especially when you talk about thousands of people died, right? But you can see why that is because, in a sense, the system functions on prepackaging everything. So when a lot of y'all may not respect Wicca, like I said, I actually respect Wicca more than a lot of other spiritual systems that people practice at times. So this is my thoughts on Wicca. Hope this helps. Till next time, peace.